Hello, hello. I think it is showtime. Let's just take a moment. I want to say welcome. Welcome to everybody who chose to join us for this fantastic and what I believe is definitely going to be a titillating talk on all things menstrual equity. And I think we're going to be throwing in some real interesting things in between. I just want all of us to take just a second to do some housekeeping. First of all, can everybody hear us? Can we get some yeses in the chat to make sure that the sound is good, that we're coming through all clear? I'm getting some from our speakers, which I think is amazing. And I just want to check to make sure that even our speakers can be heard. So if you guys will unmute one by one and just say hello, that would also be wonderful, just to make sure from a technical standpoint, we are good.
Hello, everyone.
Eve.
Hi, everyone.
Wonderful. And Kika.
Hi, everybody.
Sounds wonderful. So we are all rocking and rolling in that way. And I just want to again say thank you for showing up, for being here. And we are going to begin. We are going to begin talking about something that I think affects almost half of the population, which is our periods and menstrual equity. And I am not alone in this conversation. We are just incredibly gifted with three fantastic speakers. I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Kerry Goring. I am honored to be the moderator for tonight's titillating talk on menstrual equity. In the daytime, I'm an intimacy and relationship coach who is poised and ready about making sex pleasurable and fun. That's really what I do in a nutshell. And I also do a podcast called Medicine for the Resistance. And Medicine for the Resistance is all about taking these issues that come up in our world, and especially from spaces of the melanated majority and Indigenous folk all over the world, in fact, and discussing what it is like to live in these colonial spaces. And then finally, one of the other things that I do that's my passion is that I have a YouTube channel that we also talk about all kinds of tips, tricks, and things that are around, sex and pleasure and sensuality, which is why this conversation fits and is right up my alley. We are going to be speaking to three of our fabulous speakers. And I want you guys to all understand what we'll be doing tonight. This is a conversation. We're hoping we're going to be able to get juicy and relay a lot of information, but I want this information to come out in ways that feels authentic and real. So everybody, if you're in the audience, grab your tea, maybe it's some wine. This is maybe an adult space, or if the little ones or younger folks are with you, you may want to just filter a little bit, maybe watch with some headphones on, because some things may come out during this conversation. So I'm hoping it'll be mostly PG, but we're grown folks here. So we're going to have those conversations in ways that may be a little bit, I'm hoping anyways, a bit titillating for the talk. I also want to address and just mention and bring online that we are talking about some issues that may be a bit challenging, that may offer spaces that may cause some triggers, some feelings of being uncomfortable. And I thought that it would be of diligence for us to just run through very quickly what it may feel like if you are feeling triggered. And what a trigger can sometimes feel like is you'll notice that your body comes into a response where you feel a little bit heightened. You may feel yourself start to shake a little bit. You may find yourself almost disassociated dissociating or removing yourself from the conversation. And all of those things are natural. It can happen because, again, we're going to be talking about some things that may be a bit triggering. And if you do feel that, there are some very quick ways that you can kind of bring yourself back into the present of this moment. And I'm just going to suggest that if that is a space for you, one, feel free to let anybody, in the chat. You can always reach out and let one of us know. There are a couple of us who I know are trauma informed directly on this chat, myself and Kika, and maybe we can offer you some words. Again, this is a conversation. This is a completely safe space. And there's also some resources that we will be putting in the chat in and around places you can access if you're finding yourself really needing somebody to talk to, or maybe some handy tools that will be available outside of this or to take with you as you move forward. There's also, if you're feeling it in this moment, a great way to bring yourself back is to just touch your body. Just give yourself a touch, hold yourself, and mention to yourself that you're safe. I also really love touching like a wall. Like I have a wall right here, so I'm not crazy, but I'm just touching my wall beside me, and just giving yourself that ability to be on something solid. Maybe touch your desk, put your feet on the floor if you're like lounging in your couch. Those things will bring us back into this present space. And I think also thirdly, or I think that's thirdly, but along the lines of what we're speaking about, one of the things that I find is so calming and really does help me focus is using breath. So if you're finding yourself feeling a little out there, just feel free to take a deep breath. Maybe just put your hand over your heart, take a deep breath in, and just exhale. See, even just doing that right now brings me back into focus. It will help slow your heart rate and offer you a moment to just come into presence. Again, this is a safe space. We are all poised and ready to hear you, and I am looking forward to this chat. So enough about me in this moment, or about all of the, regular boring stuff that we were talking about. The housekeeping can be put on the shelf. And I'm going to start with, and I definitely know I'm going to bring in our land acknowledgement that is to come, but I think I really want to kind of bring some of the focus back into our conversation today and the fabulous speakers that we are talking to today. And normally, I could read you their bios, which, that's great, right? It's great, but not the way I really want to do this. So I'm going to open the floor, and starting with you, Rachel, let us know who you are, why you are here, and why you're passionate about this space.
Of course. Thanks, Kerry. Everyone loving my nerdy headset here. Okay, I have to say I've had audio issues with my computer, but it's good quality audio. Okay, so we don't mess with the headset. Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel. My pronouns are she, her. Full-time work, I actually work on ice cream brands in Canada, including Ben & Jerry's ice cream, which does activism work in Canada, which is really cool. So if you haven't checked it out, it's super, super unique. But on the side, and what I am most passionate about is menstrual equity advocacy. So I started Here for Her, which we're transitioning our name to Here for Health. And we started back in 2016, and the space has changed so much. So I'm really excited to chat about all of the developments in the menstrual equity space. And I'm just so passionate about it because it affects not only everyone who menstruates, but also like the caretakers and people close to those who menstruate, which is basically everyone. So I'm really excited to chat about this with everyone tonight.
Thank you so much. I absolutely love that. And it's interesting, ice cream really is one of those things that I think about when I'm on my cycle. Ice cream is a way to go. So I love how you've tied that in. It's a beautiful thing, Rachel. Thank you for that introduction. And let's roll on and You know who else is in my sights is Eve. Hello, Eve. I haven't had a chance to even hear your voice yet, so I'm looking forward to hearing all the wonderful things about you.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Eve Nyambiya. I work as the Gender and Sexual Violence Education Coordinator for the Office of Human Rights and Equity at Brock University. Long name. But yeah, basically what I do in my role is that I do a lot of, I would consider myself as more of the preventative person. So while we have people in our office that respond to instances of sexual violence or gender and sexual violence, I'm more so doing the education and prevention piece. So a lot of the work that I do is things like workshops and trainings and events. Anything around sexual violence awareness, teaching consent, how to support a survivor, how to support a friend if they disclose an instance of sexual violence to you, rape culture, like just anything along those lines is all about those preventative awareness pieces that my job entails. So I've actually been spending the month of January piloting a program where we train all the students and residents about consent. And it's been 3 times a day. So I have been talking a lot throughout this month, but it's all important work. And I'm really excited to engage in this topic because I had been involved in a few initiatives pertaining to menstrual equity in terms, along with our office, Human Rights and Equity, and the student union at Brock University, making sure that menstrual products are accessible in all of our washrooms and open spaces. So I'm really excited. I'm so excited to engage in this discussion, especially talking about stigma and taboo, because that has plagued my life from time. So I'm excited to engage in these conversations today.
Oh, we are so going to get into all of it because it's such a space for all of us. And, you know, I know in my world, I think about what this has meant, you know, how I'm moving through some of the different cycles of being a woman, and I'm entering the final stages, which again, we will bring up as we talk about these ideas of stigma. But it's just interesting how this is now something that I'm seeing is coming front and center, this idea of menstruation and access. And I'm excited as well to see what else comes up. So Eve, I'm so glad that, you know, you've been talking, but you haven't been talked out. So we've got chance for you today to continue this conversation. And thank you so much, because we are gonna roll on through to the near and dear to my heart, Kika. Kika is joining us, everyone. I just want everybody to know this because I think it's like just amazing. And I just adore this woman in so many ways. But Kika is joining us from Europe, across the world. And it is literally what time in your universe, Kika? And tell us about yourself.
Yay! So thank you so much for having me. My name is Kika. My pronouns are she, her, and it's 1 a.m. here right now. And so my background is I grew up in Poland and I live in Finland now. And I'm a certified sex, love, and relationship coach. And that's the background that Kerry and I share. And this is how we met. So we have worked together and facilitated workshops for women and for people around their sexuality. And that really has to do with coming to the body and making your body a safe space for you so that you can live with purpose and express yourself out in the world. And so that's really my work, helping people tune into their body. And that means, you know, into our sexuality, into our sensations, into our emotions, and working with any blockages that are stopping us from going after what we want and that prevent us from relating to others. And yeah, and so I do that through one-to-one work and group workshops as well. And so I believe that these issues of menstrual health, I mean, it's vital because this is how we are raised. This is what influences how we think of ourselves and our bodies. and what we think we're worth. And for me personally, also religion and Catholic upbringing has played a huge role in that. So I will speak a little bit about that, as well as contraception and then abortion and how that fits into our relationships as we grow up in this environment.
Kika, so much that is juicy, so much that is candid, so much of this conversation that I am so grateful, because we can see we've got an array of panelists here. And I think we're all going to bring some very interesting perspectives to this space. And I also am hoping that as we move through this conversation, we'll very much be able to touch upon how all things are intertwined, how these spaces connect, how we show up as women. And to do and open up this space, I really would enjoy if everyone would just spend some time with me as I do some musings. I think it was an interesting space for me recently. I am going to offer up a land acknowledgement. And I had to think about this one. So here's what I came up with. Today's talk is about menstrual equity, and it got me thinking about many things. I got to thinking about blood. It is the purveyor of life. Blood flows through us and is vital to our existence. It's present from birth to death. It sustains us in life. It flows, stops only in death. Blood, it marks the very essence of being female at birth. Menstruation, our cycles, move in tandem with the moon, and it's seen as a foundational rite of passage that defines womanhood and our place in the world. Blood, it's shed by the linings of our wombs. It flows freely in the processes of childbirth and bringing forth of life. And that is considered a joyous event when it's wanted, but one that comes with labor and resilience, because birthing is no easy task. And trust me, I've been there, I've done it a couple of times, more than a couple of times. I am sure our colonial masters would agree. As blood of the keepers of this land, this territory that we are hosting this event on is the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Shawanoton peoples. And so much of their blood has been shed needlessly under the guise of birthing a nation. I honor and I acknowledge their sacrifice. And there's such a correlation between the importance of blood, equity, and the land. It is my wish today that as we move through this discussion, that we acknowledge this bloodshed and the displacement of Indigenous folks that's been integral for us to be here today. I want to bring awareness to the cost of their sacrifice, the deep wounding to their culture, their traditions and connections, their very way of life, and how it has created cycles of tragedy that have moved through and affected them for generations, and recognizing that the effects are still ongoing. I desire to pay honor to the missing and Indigenous women who have disappeared, labored, and their blood shed while they've been dismissed, devalued, and disappeared. Let's take this moment to honor them and all the women around the world who are disregarded, suppressed, and commodified for the work of their wombs. And sadly, often blood flows needlessly and tragically when it is left to capitalist and colonial ends. I want to bring attention to the menstrual traditions held by our ancestors around womb care and the environmentally friendly ways that were used for menstruation. The holders of this land understood that when blood flowed during our moon cycles, turning to Mother Earth could provide gentle protection. From this practice of free bleeding, which just flowed back deeply into the land, or using staphum moss. I may not have pronounced that correctly, but I'm holding space for it, because not only was this moss absorbent, it offered a healthy layer of clean bacteria that would be added to a woman's hygienic spaces to help her regenerate and move through her flow. We understand innately, I think it's in all of us, that nature provides natural and safe solutions when we are willing and aware. So as we move through this conversation today on menstrual equity, let's remember the ways of our ancestors and how blood and bloodshed take on many dimensions. There's much to be appreciated and learned. Ashe. Deep breath. And exhale. Woo! Yeah, just some things I was thinking about. I appreciate the time in this space to be able to express that way. And just thinking on this, you know, when I was writing that piece, I thought about, again, how there's so many things that intertwine when we think about menstruation and, you know, this idea of equity. And so where I want to begin is maybe with what does that mean for you, the panelists? What does it mean when we say menstrual equity? What does it bring up? And just pipe in. Whoever's feeling it, come on in.
I can kick us off. Just kind of noting that for menstrual equity for me is very directly in terms of experience with policy change and initiatives in Canada. So that is kind of the lens I'm coming from. And then obviously acknowledging my privilege as a cis white woman and that conversation, which I really want to get into a little bit later too, because it's really important to chat about that. But for me, it's very interesting. Menstrual equity actually has this definition that I never use. I couldn't even tell you what it is because it's just, I don't think it's super relatable. It's not easy to understand. So I typically kind of describe it in a few different ways. And again, I keep hearing new ways, and I think they're becoming more and more important and adopted. So this is a very fluid definition. But I kind of describe it as menstrual equity, referring to the affordability, accessibility, and safety of menstrual products, but then not being limited to just products, also understanding the education, specifically also health education and healthcare that's involved in that conversation. Another way to describe it is kind of the disproportionate amount that menstruation affects someone who menstruates versus someone who does not, which can kind of look like many things. The extra cost of affording menstrual products, which we'll get into, the symptoms and side effects, you know, everyone's period looks and feels differently. So how that affects someone, how someone is able to access menstrual products. So that is kind of my two-pronged definition of what is menstrual equity. But I think, long story short, it really comes down to, we believe, and I can speak just in general as advocates kind of in Canada, we believe that menstrual products should be provided in all public spaces, just like toilet paper. And there's really no difference in that. I know though, when I first started getting into the space, someone kind of just described it as, it's no different than toilet paper, which I'm sure you've heard, which it's not. And it's so interesting because in old articles, and people have been advocating for this for, 50 plus years, they used to describe toilet paper as a necessity item and menstrual products as a luxury item, which is absolutely hilarious in one way, but then also so sad because it is a necessity item, yet so many people in every city across Canada Canada are not able to afford or access them. So I think that's kind of like the basis of how we look at menstrual products, and then therefore menstrual equity, because if you don't have access, you cannot afford, then that will impact your life from an equity standpoint. So I think that's kind of with my lens where it starts. And then I'm also so excited to hear from the other panelists, because I think I have my kind of understanding, and I feel like I'm going to learn a lot tonight as well.
I absolutely love that, because I think that is a really succinct definition. You know what I mean? Like it offers the space that I think it's a great place to kind of start, because it's wide. There's a wide berth to this and a wide scope. So I love that you got this opportunity to give us the first dive in, and I too am excited to hear everybody else. And just as you were talking, the one thing I just want to mention really quickly is, when I think about menstrual equity, I was thinking about it from a space of how I knew when a man loved me. I've had some significant relationships in my life, and when my man was willing to go to the drugstore or to the store and pick up my menstrual products.
The stigma piece. Yes. Yeah.
And he would just do that, right?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, this man loves me, because of, again, as we say, like it's a little thing, but because we have this stigma piece around it, you know, I remember thinking how brave that guy would be to do this, right?
Yeah.
And I'm so glad to see that the thoughts and the ideas are progressing and moving forward. So I appreciate that thought. And so I'm going to just, be quiet now. And either one of you, Eve or Kika, let us know what you're thinking. Whoever feels called, come on in.
Sure, I'll go next. But yeah, I think, Rachel, your definition was definitely very similar to mine, because I know traditionally when people talk about menstrual equity, it was always about like affordability and accessibility of period products. So they'll be like, okay, let's make sure we have pads and tampons and other things in the bathrooms, and have it in our offices, and et cetera, et cetera. And I do think that it's a little bit more than that. So it's also about making sure that people have the needs, support, and the choices to decide how they can take care of their menstrual health. So it's not just making sure, we have pads, like we have the products, in the spaces, but it's also making sure that we have, we're able to make choices based on our menstrual health. So I know when remote work started becoming more popular, not just because of COVID. Well, COVID did play a role, but a lot of people like myself, I was actually really happy about that, because I'm going to be pretty candid. My cramps, they're not great. Day 1, 2, and 3, I'm in my bed. I have my little heat pack, I have my Advil on hand. It's a whole ordeal. And I'm able to work at my own pace from home. But if I'm in an office, right, I don't really have a lot of options to be able to take care of my menstrual health. So I do think menstrual equity plays a role in how we can be able to navigate or function in society with our menstrual health, being prioritized. So I'm definitely looking forward to discussing that, and being a gender sexual violence educator, even talking about the connection with education and reproductive care. Sexual violence is also linked into that too. So when we talk about periods, they're like, now you're a woman, and that might be a good thing, but that's also been the result for a lot of sexual violence for young girls. So just making sure that people are equipped with the education and the knowledge and support that they need to navigate, this new period, pun intended, but this new period in their life. That's what I also would consider as menstrual equity as well.
Fabulous. And see how this is working? We're getting this, everybody's expounding on, that initial definition. And I'm absolutely loving the space. And I have some thoughts around it, but I'm going to save it. And I'm going to roll into Kika, because I'm interested to get your perspective, Kika.
Yes, thank you everyone for mentioning what it means to you. And so I will not repeat, I will just keep adding. So for me, actually, in preparation for this talk, I did go ahead and Google menstrual equity just to make sure I like understand what's going on here. And I can tell you already the first thing is that so many articles, even from like reputable organizations, just classify it as girls and women's issue without the mentioning of trans people, non-binary people. And so I feel like that was already a red flag, which is something that I think most of us are like learning about now to be more inclusive in our language and practices. And but yeah, that first of all, that was there. And like I said, from sources that many people would trust without source criticism, or like without thinking, oh, what else could that look like? And then to continue with that thread of that menstrual products should be as accessible as toilet paper, but they aren't. And so it became this like, women's issue, menstruating people's issue. And with that, I find that what also happens is that because we menstruate, then somehow we are also the ones responsible for birth control, which puts the responsibility solely on the person who can get pregnant, as if we didn't have other things to worry about, such as diseases, infections, and all of that. And so that is there. So just like placing it here. And of course, how then that impacts, again, sexual violence and consent, and needing to, even in like close, intimate relationships, reminding your partner that, hello, let's share the responsibility. This is a human thing. It's not just because I'm menstruating and I can get pregnant that you don't have to worry about condoms and your like 24/7, 365 fertility. So yeah. And also how that there is this huge stigma and shame and lack of education when we first get our periods, and how that just leaves really young people, children, age 10 or whatever. For me, I think I was 9 when I got my period, which was terrifying. It was embarrassing. I didn't know what was going on. And for so many people, it's like, we just don't know. Is this pain normal? Is the length of the period normal? How often should it happen? And so from that moment, the disconnection from the body happens, and that fear and disgust that then we take into, just like how we interact with our healthcare providers, how we show up in our relationships.
Kika, I'm like breathing that in because, you're touching upon so many pieces, and, I'm sure we're going to start to unpack it as we move on here. And it will be interesting to see where that conversation goes, because when you were speaking about your experience with your first period, I was sitting down and thinking about my first experience. I was actually 14. And interestingly enough, I've always had an interest in sex and sexuality and sexual health. So I was poised. I was the girl or the go-to person when it came to anything sex and sexual intimacy with my friend group. And I mean, I had all the pads, I had the tampons, I could tell you exactly what was happening. I was that person. And it was interesting because I was ready. And in my world, 10 rolled around, because I was reading books about this from the age of about 8 and 9. I often tell a story about how my mother didn't give me the talk, but she gave me the book. And the books talked all about what this experience was. And so, by 10, I was ready, looking for some things. 11 rolled by and I was ready. I was still looking for some things. 12 rolled by and I was sure some things were going to happen. And especially because now a lot of my friends were starting to hit that space. And, I would be the one they would talk to. If there was a challenge, if there was a problem, it rolled out through me. 13 rolled by. And I remember going, there is now something wrong with me. And even though I knew, and I could rationalize it, I mean, it just took my body a little bit of time to hit that spot. It was a bit challenging for me. And I recognize now that how much of our sense of who we are is also wrapped into this experience of having your period. And so I remember by the summer of my grade 8 year, which is the last year of our elementary school, of primary school, before you go to the secondary education, I remember thinking that if I don't have this thing by August, I remember written my, like we just got out. So it was like July 1, must have been first. The sun was hot. I remember it. And going, if I don't have it, my mother's taking me to the doctor because this is ridiculous, right? And as I said it, I remember going to the bathroom, wiping, and there was the manna from heaven as far as I was concerned. It was such a celebratory thing for me, because I had put so much expectation into this space. And, I didn't even tell my mother, if I remember correctly. There was no need because I was ready. But again, I know my circumstance was a little bit different in that way. And nobody told me, you can read about the cramps. You can read about, some of the feelings that may come up while you're in your cycle, but nobody really can prepare you for it until you have to go through that experience. And I really want us to kind of talk a little bit about this. Again, the space for me, and I told the story because one, we look at it as like this monumental event, you come into your womanhood, all of those things. And I thought I was grown. So for me, that was so a thing about coming into my womanhood. But it's also about the space for me anyway, around it meaning something, meaning that I had moved to this next level of being, but there was no fundamental anchoring maybe in understanding what that would entail. And, how now that I could get this period, I got my period, and how that would affect me sexually even. What did that bring to my sex life or burgeoning sex life at 14? And what did all of it entail? I noticed that when my mother and father finally did find out, they were a lot more cautious around how I was, interacting with boys, and well, they didn't realize, but girls too. What was happening in all of those spaces for me? And I'm curious to know, what was that like for you and other women maybe that in your lives? And feel free, you don't have to share if you don't want to, but I'm just curious.
I can jump in just from the sense of education, Kerry, as you were speaking to me, like with my social enterprise, that's really what we focus on, is when you're educated about your health, you can make informed decisions. So although I focus on menstrual equity advocacy, really like our account is just focused on health education because, and in my situation, again, very privileged in the sense that my mom's actually a nurse. So we had conversations and all these things, but then yet here I am still at age 30, still figuring figuring out my period. Like, do I have endometriosis? Finally getting a referral, which took a year. And so like it's quite wild because this is all to me comes down to our healthcare system, and also health education. So when you're not educated on these things as young people, and you don't have necessarily guardians, to sit you down and have these talks with you, sometimes there's a lot of misinformation with friends, which like, it's great that you can have open chats with friends. That's step one, but sometimes there's misinformation there. So to me, this conversation, a lot of it is just the education piece, which I know, again, is really exciting that in this advocacy space, there's now that bigger focus on education. Even like, for example, the federal government is rolling out a menstrual equity fund where they're giving a lot of money to shelters and organizations, which is super exciting. It has been a long time coming. And for example, education is a piece of that budget. So we're actually seeing education in the conversation around menstrual equity, which I would say, when I entered this space, it wasn't there. And that was kind of why I started my social enterprise, because I felt like so many people didn't have access, and so many people still don't have family doctors, and like, where would we get this information? And the healthcare system on the same side needs to, there's a lot going on there. Clearly, we don't need to get into that, but a lot of work to be done there too, especially when it comes to like racial bias and all these things. And it's so layered. So I think one, education, while you were speaking, Kerry, and then number two is the stigma still. And I'll let the other folks chat to that, but I know like the stigma and just of course, the patriarchy did this one to us too, right? Like anybody with a uterus, it was seen as, and so therefore menstruating, it was seen as gross and dirty, and people who menstruate just have to figure it out. Like that's been the mentality. So what does that mean? Well, somehow figure out what's going on through someone, or Google it, or, or don't never know, and then get access to products somehow. But, how you're going to do that? So for me, like that's all wrapped up in a bow as to like, at the end of the day, if you're a student at school or you're at work, like Eve was saying, and you don't have access to products, you're going to leave. And so that's the equity piece. And that's the piece that we can kind of chat about some countries that have stepped up now and offered certain things, because we're finally realizing like that's a part of the equity conversation that like is new. Like that was, really not considered. So that is my rant. Someone else jump in.
Anybody else? Eve or Kika, you got anything you want to add?
You go.
Okay, I can, I had a few pieces I wanted to add. First of all, for me personally, there was that stigma of getting my period really young and feeling so confused about it. And I remember already in as a child needing to take sports classes with other kids and then not being able to participate when the other children don't yet know about periods. And it's like, oh my God, did you get it? Like, what is it like? Is it gross? You're gross. And feeling like I have to walk up to my like sports teacher, who was an elderly gentleman, and tell him, hello, sir, I cannot participate. That was terrifying. It was really embarrassing. And adding on that, I also I grew up with a single dad. So imagine that, where there wasn't period products in our house unless we specifically requested them or requested money for them. Because again, it just didn't exist in his mind. It wasn't like he was being mean about it. He just didn't know what to buy. And my sister and I, we had no idea how to communicate what we needed because we didn't know what we needed. And then with friends, there wasn't these conversations, not only because we were so young, but also because of the Catholic culture that is shaming, really hardcore shaming all things female. And I'm not even gonna go into the trans and non-binary part, because that obviously doesn't exist like in the whole country. So that is just so harmful. And that, that feeling of like, I don't know what products I need to manage this, and I don't know how to communicate it. And it's already at such a young age affecting my life and how I show up at school. And so then, of course, it affects how I will show up to work, even if it's just this piece of shame of needing to be seen in this like awkward, embarrassing situation where my body is doing something gross.
I just want to hold some space for that little Kika who, you know, had to navigate those waters so bravely and is, you know, here to tell us the tales. And I really appreciate the share, because I think, again, it's coming from such a lived space. And it just highlights for many of us how the stigma just moves through our reality. You know, it really has many dimensions to how it shows up. So let's just hold little Kika in mind as we talk a little bit more, right? We're all holding little Kika as we continue this conversation. And Eve, I keep doing that, apologies. Eve, I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, my story is actually really similar to yours, Kerry. Where do I begin? So I recall, you know, all my friends getting their period all throughout elementary school, like grade school, 5, 6, 7, 8, those grades. And I didn't get any at all, go all through grade 8, and I start my first year of high school, so it'd be grade 9, 14, still didn't get it. It's like September, October, and then I remember this day vividly, December, it happens. And it was exactly 1 month after my birthday. And when I remember, I just go to the bathroom and I do my business, and then I wipe and I find blood. And I thought I was bleeding from my back end. I don't know. I just did not receive the proper education at the time, or I wasn't listening in class. I don't know. But I was freaking out. I was like, what is happening? Like what's going on? I thought I was dying. And thankfully I had 2 older sisters who were able, like, I just went to them, I'm like, listen, like, I'm bleeding from my butt, like, what's going on? And they laughed at me. They're like, this is your period. And they're like, congratulations. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what? And I actually started experiencing cramping and everything. And it was a whole ordeal. So thankfully it wasn't like that traumatic, but I can tell you one thing for sure. Like, in my household, I have 2 sisters, 1 brother, and then both my parents. In a lot of African cultures, talking about sex, talking about periods, you cannot talk about it among people of opposite sexes. So every time I brought it up we would just be eating dinner or something, and my dad will be there, my brother will be there. I was be like, oh my gosh, I got my period. And mom would be like, don't say that around, you know, your father or your brother. Like, that's not appropriate. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean it's not appropriate? Like, the stigma here, right? So it was like, first of all, they're outnumbered in this household. So they're just going to have to deal with the fact that we're all getting our periods and we're going to get synced up and stuff. But I do recall never really having a chat from my mom about sex or my period, actually. I don't recall that ever happening. And now that I'm older, I recognize that it's a cultural thing, you know. In a lot of African cultures, they don't really have like in my parents' time, talking about sex, talking about periods just was not a part of the conversation. And then especially among men, it was just not part of the conversation. Like, it just wasn't a part of the conversation. So I had to figure out actually most of this stuff myself, especially when it came to sexuality and sexual activity. I just had to figure out on my own, because in the home, it just wasn't there. And of course, being in Ontario, the education system was lacking as well. So that was more so my experience. It was a bit of confusion, but it was at least supportive, but, you know, mostly confusion there for when I received mine, that was for sure.
I'm I'm drinking it all in. I really am, because I'm hearing so many similarities, and I really want to touch on this point of what I'm hearing from all of our experiences is two things. One, the understanding that how we receive and are socialized around our periods very much interacts with our society and the culture that we come from, and how I know that for me too, I come from a West Indian Caribbean background, highly religious. You know, I went to Catholic school, and my parents, however, were Anglican, but all of the rest of my extended family were Protestant, but devoutly Christian. So needless to say, I was in church like every day, except for maybe Saturday, maybe, and it depended. But that experience really gave me the understanding of that there is this wide berth that exists around sex and sexuality, because I was always somebody who wanted to talk about it. And I would hit those barriers, you know, from family members and people that would not allow us to have these conversations. And I'm curious, are we still in spaces with school where they're only doing 1 week of sexual education in grades 7 and 8? And then you get nothing else after that point. And if I remember correctly, mine was in grade 7, and it was a male teacher that had to deliver the talk on menstruation. And I remember my teacher, shout out if you know who you were, turning beet red. He was beet red when he was talking about ovaries and fallopian tubes and the cycle. He was so flustered that I ended up actually, stopping him and going, do you need some help? Because by then I was so well read. And I remember going, let me help you, Mr. You know who you are. And I literally got up and started talking to the girls about this and to the class about it, because I just couldn't understand the stigma. And I get this now. Society has, as was mentioned earlier, created looks from the patriarchal spaces, and dare I say, even capitalism have taken this and used it for an advantageous, way of being. I think that when you diminish a certain element that is a very natural and normal process for so many of us, this cycle that we exist in, it allows room for us to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Desensitized to it. And then you can commodify something even in a greater space, that your bodies become removed from ourselves. And I'm curious to hear about that, like this idea of the diminishing of the process of our natural process of menstruation and how that affects how we show up as women or women identified and our non-binary and trans folk, because I think it is all interconnected. Any thoughts on that?
Does anyone want to go? I can jump in, but I'll leave it. Okay. Well, I think it has everything to do with it, right, Kerry? Because first of all, if there's no education on it, and I know this is something I could go on for hours, so I'm not going to, but I promise that varies obviously by province, especially for Canada. And I know a lot of sex ed was taken out of the curriculum as a certain someone came in as the Premier of Ontario. So things like that are really, really upsetting. So first of all, if we're at square zero, right, with no sex ed, then, someone who I could only imagine what we all went through and what we just shared and different experiences. And then of course, disproportionately affecting someone who is trans and that conversation, all of that is nowhere to be found, right? So I think so much of this is education in schools, 100%, but then also better access to support through organizations, through and then also through healthcare. So I think there's so many different answers there. But in terms of society, the two things that come to my mind that I like are still mind-boggling to me is that it was just like, what, like 2 years ago? And now with COVID, I'm getting like, what is time? But like, I think it was 2 years ago where it was just like the Always commercials, right? We're using the blue liquid for your period to show on the pads. Like, I'm pretty sure that was just, okay, someone will look it up and say I'm wrong, and that's totally valid. But like a couple of years ago that they started using red. Do you know what I mean? So like, for example, even like an Always pad commercial was still not okay with showing red for blood. So like when you, right, like when there's nothing in media and nothing shown about periods at all, and again, gross, ew, don't talk about it, figure it out, your own problem, not ours, gross, like being like, you know, inferior to cis men or those who don't menstruate, right? It's just like internally, you know, years and years and years of oppression, like here we are. And so and like I know Turning Red, the Disney movie or the Pixar film that came out that finally spoke a little bit about menstruation, and like you should have seen the comments on it. Like I even know on our like social media, we post about how amazing it is. And I got so much hate, and I was just like, block, 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 about like how that should not be shown to children. Like, and that was just like, again, a couple of years ago. So like, it's still so mind boggling to me that like so much has happened, which is so amazing, especially in the policy space, especially in the awareness space, but then so much still, you know, it has to happen, you know, like, especially in the stigma realm.
Yeah, we there's see
yeah
right when I hear it, I'm like, yay.
I know, yay
right?
though, because some good things, but like still apparently a long ways to go, clearly.
Very much so. And we're talking about our corner of the world.
Yes.
I mean, you know, when we're talking about in Canada, who, you know, we're supposed to be
more progressive,
right, and liberal, and how are we still having to battle from the days of my teacher being beat red, but at least giving the information or attempting to.
And I know school boards, like I think it's up, again, someone please jump in, like if you know, but like I know I've worked with certain school boards that have like an equity team where they come in and chat. Like I think they're, you know, are amazing. There is amazing work being done, you know, at certain schools, but I hadn't heard about it being better. I had only lately heard about it being worse because of budget cuts.
Well, at the very least, I was in school a little while ago. Let me put it that way. You know, it's been a little while.
No, but even me, like, what, I don't know, how old am I? Like, okay, 15 years ago, it was still like, if you go on the birth control pill, you'll have a stroke and die. Like that was in grade 10 health class for me. Like that wasn't that long ago. And I remember like a half the class is on the pill, having sex, all of the things. And I remember going home being like, Mom, like I'm on it. I had to go on the pill in grade 6 when I got my period because I couldn't play sports because it was so heavy. So I could totally relate. Yeah, Kika, I think you said that like that was me, right? And I was lucky that I had access to birth control, else I wouldn't have been able to play sports, right? Because like I would have missed that opportunity solely because of my period. So yeah, it's pretty like mind-boggling that we still have, you know, there is still so much work to do from that experience. Yeah.
And it's I'm like just reeling from, because I'm thinking to myself that you would think that this would have been a space that would have held steady or at least expanded from you know, my time into now. And when I'm looking at, you know, when I was looking and researching this space, I was fascinated with how it is showing up again. All over the world. For example, in India, they're doing quite a bit of work around changing some of the myths around, you know, our periods and menstruation, and really diving in deeply into the culture of shame that we're so talking about here. So this becomes something that is universal. And are we finding that women are getting together? Like, what do we know about those kinds of movements? And Kika, I'm really interested to hear you, and Eve as well, all of us, and of course you, Rachel, like everybody, to talk about is like, are we feeling like this is a revolution That's maybe what it is.
Yeah, so I can talk about that. I will just add that I was inspired to look it up, how menstrual equity is being treated in Poland, my home country, and even how, like, what are the words that people use and all of that. And I found this report or this foundation that just started researching this in 2020. Right. So it is super recent, and it was inspired by, like, okay, we know that there are certain countries in the world that struggle with access to menstrual products and lack of education. And we think of them as basically not Western countries, right? It's the same what you guys said, like Canada, like what the hell, it should be perfect, but it isn't. And so in Poland, they just were releasing those first reports on like actual numbers and learning that there is inequality, and there are many people who can't afford period products, and it is now being fixed. So I'm really happy to report that there were a group of girls from high school who actually came up with that initiative of distributing period products to schools and to women's shelters and all of that. And they have grown it since. And each year it's like a whole movement now. And they have their I think printed booklets and online resources educating people about it. And they are getting funding, and they are creating those boxes for menstrual pads to be placed at schools and at workplaces, and more schools each year are joining them and volunteering, like wanting to be included in that program. So once this has appeared, people really, I think, begin to understand how important it is, and schools want to participate in it. But I think it really took somebody to offer it and to create that first and break that stigma and be like, okay, we can be educated about it. We can come up with ideas how to provide those products in ways that aren't shaming people, so you don't have to walk through that school corridor carrying a box of tampons and like die inside. So that is now being fixed. And I was actually really excited to read about it because I didn't have that. And obviously it's been just like a couple of years. But that really, I think, speaks to that revolution that you mentioned, Kerry. And I feel like with younger people as well, even with my cousins, I noticed it, like they know so much from TikTok about periods, about trans rights, about all of it. And it's like even my cousins who are in their 20s commenting on my cousins who are like 14 years old and being like, oh my God, the education on TikTok is amazing. Because it's better than nothing. And actually, a lot of the time it's pretty good. It's pretty good for these kids. And so, yeah, like high school girls just started a huge movement in Poland. And I was really proud to hear about that.
Let's celebrate. Let's celebrate. I believe that deserves some claps, some snaps. It deserves all of it. And I think there's something to be said, as you mentioned, Kika, because, I was joking with a friend of mine yesterday about how in my day, if we wanted information, we had to roll to the library, you know what I mean? And go through the card catalog and all of those things. And it's such an amazing space to know that information rolls up, albeit that algorithm for TikTok can be like an abyss, because it will just keep you going. But there is realms and spaces where the information is going out. And even if some of it isn't right, at least hopefully there's enough dialogue happening that you can get into the core of it. So I'm excited, and let's celebrate that that's something that's moving front and center. And Eve, I want to hear, some more. Like, what do you think has been happening around the world in communities that may be familiar to you and maybe not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think there's a revolution. And to be honest with you, I think this revolution's been going on for forever. Before my existence, before all of us, I think people have been engaging in a revolution to some degree. Even for me, I have a personal revolution where, I just walk into the grocery store and I'm like, I need a pad, and I'm not being secretive about it. It's in my cart on top of my bread and fruits. It's out there, it's public. It's like, yeah, this is, I have a period. It's going to be chocolate in there and it's happening right now, So like, I'm not going to be ashamed about it. But I definitely think there's a revolution going on. And I was thinking, hearing this conversation about education and how it's taught in schools, I'm also thinking about, I work in a university. So I also think about like the academia. So, people get their information somewhere, and it's typically from universities and colleges that do research about, menstruation and women's health and everything along those lines. And one thing that I didn't learn or know of until recently was really the lack of research and lack of information surrounding menstruation and surrounding women's health. I mean, I'll be honest, to be candid, I've learned a lot from social media, actually, because there's just not enough information, not enough studies, not even enough studies about menstruation and sexual violence. Like, there's just not a lot of studies. And I'm thinking, why? Why is this information not being funded? Why is it not being considered in these spaces? Because we do have to teach it in schools, but we do have to have, peer-reviewed articles and, proper evidence, and it's lacking. So it also starts from the higher places of education and other institutions that are supposed to be producing this information. Where's the support, right? So I just think about it a lot when it comes to women's health, because I'll be honest, I was looking up, it's something called lightning crotch. Actually, there's a proper medical term for it. I think it's called like I can't pronounce it. It's like vulvodynia or something, dynia, along those lines. I have no idea. But I was just researching those symptoms, and it's right now what's considered unexplained. So I'm thinking, unexplained or under research? Like, where is the information about these things? Like, why is there a deficit here? Like, this is important. It seems to be pretty common when it comes to research that women's health and menstrual health is not important. So I take big issue to that. And we're trying to teach it in schools, but we're not even having it researched. So
yeah, it's such, this to me, we got to bring it forward, because again, you are quite right. I have recently been doing some research myself around ADHD and like women and how that has shown up in women's health, and through my travels with that experience, I found out that because women are so deeply linked to our hormonal system, so much of a woman's body or women identifying bodies, we are run by our hormonal spaces. Our endocrine system is huge, and that's hard. It's hard. And because it's been hard, I think that a lot of times, again, this plays back into the stigma. Men have not, like a lot of male scientists are normally at the front running and just have not seen the purpose to do that study. And I think that we're now starting to demand that these studies be done. And I was really feeling very hopeful, because they're recognizing that they can no longer leave this space out, that our endocrine system is a vital part of the functionings of how women's health moves. And so until I'm hearing murmurings anyways that they're beginning to realize it and stepping front and center in and around, for example, ADHD shows up during puberty. 2 times that women's are diagnosed is during puberty. And they're noticing now there's a huge diagnosis for women who are perimenopausal. And what they're finding are in menopausal, sorry, because those are both enormously huge triggers hormonally. And so it is affecting the female body. So again, we have been, even though we're, around, there's a whole lot of us, it is still not a space that has been valued as front and center. And our health has been put on the back burner in so many ways. But I do want to celebrate that it seems like that's beginning to move a little bit front and center. And I am like, yeah, it is time for us to have those conversations. Can we talk a little bit, maybe just moving it forward a little bit as we talk about all of the things, but how has this affected your life? Like just growing up, existing with your period. And it was funny. It was like the universe knew today. I started my period today. I forgot my hot water bottle. It should have been tucked behind my back. I'm feeling it. That's why I'm mentioning it right now. It started today, and I thought it was such an interesting space because I'm moving into, as I mentioned, I'm perimenopausal, which means perimenopause is like the final stages, which we don't talk about at all. Even as an educated, woman in this field, I've had to really dig in and figure out what was happening to me, because we think menopause is just a time and that you shrivel up and die. But, we don't talk about what that experience really is in the world. And so I'm not menopausal yet. I'm in this perimenopause space. So I never know when I'm going to be gifted with my period. And so it will show up, but the hormonal spaces are real. And I still have to navigate it. And so for me, there's this sense of knowing that I'm moving through one stage or phase of my life that's been such a defining phase, because we put such menstruation and having children and fertility and all of those things on like this pedestal. And now I'm moving into this stage where, it almost becomes like a woman ceases to exist. When you reach this age, you're supposed to shrivel up and die or something. I don't know. It is definitely not going to be my story. And in fact, I'm all about that reinvention. But I'm wondering, what is that like now for you and your peers and the spaces you're in as you're moving through these steps?
I can go. So it's really interesting. I'm actually the exact opposite right now, which is I have had really strong ovulation pain for the past 24 hours, which is something that, again, I was never taught about. And that you can even feel that you're ovulating, and then that it can be painful sometimes, and it can come with similar cramps as your menstruation, although like they are a little bit different, but they can be similar in intensity, and it can make you nauseous and all the things. And so for me, that's really interesting, this idea that right now for me, as I don't have any kids, but I am in a long-term partnership, and there are all these conversations around having children. And so I notice, as I'm not ready yet, I have this more complicated relationship to my ovulation and to my fertility, which shows up as pain. And so for a while, it's almost like my periods are easier to manage than my ovulation. And I think that really shows like how much our emotions and our mental state and our unprocessed stuff affects everything. It affects the symptoms in our body. It affects if we are able to look for help or ask for help. And of course, there are the issues with this not even being a conversation, but I mean, like, admitting this to yourself, or even asking a friend, or calling a helpline, or all of that. It's just, I think it really has to do with like these, a sense of self-worth and feeling deserving, and that, like periods are here and fertility is here. And that is just such a charged topic for so many people, whether you want it or not. You want it, but don't have it. You have lots of it and you don't want any of it. It's not your identity. You wish it was just gone. And for me in my work, it's as well, leading pleasure circles and one-to-one sessions with clients, healing from any like womb, medical trauma, abortions, and stuff like that. It's how these experiences, coupled with that shame, they just stay in our bodies. And for me, what I found as a great antidote to period pain was actually pleasure and self-pleasuring and masturbation and orgasms. And so I will just share that really quickly for the sake of time. And if somebody's interested, they can just research it later. But I had only one unmedicated period in my adult life. And it was when I was doing a self-pleasure challenge of self-pleasuring every single day leading up to my period. And during my period, so for 7 days straight. And I did not need to take painkillers. And that was crazy. But the even crazier thing was that it only happened once. And then it was so much effort for me to choose pleasure that I was like, you know what? I'll take 1 day of pain. I'll stuff myself with painkillers because it's easier. It's what I'm used to. It's what's more socially acceptable for me to have this pain and to spend this day in bed and to take painkillers rather than be in self-pleasure and owning that this time is for me to rest and to connect with myself. And that was just a really crazy experience. And I've done years of this work reclaiming my body and my sexuality. And it still is so freaking hard to choose pleasure, even though I know it would help with pain.
I love where this is going. And I really want to hold some space again for exactly what you're saying, Kika. We have tied this experience that is such, again, a natural movement of our, it's a cycle that our bodies flow through and move through, but it doesn't always feel like a flow. It's not easy for many of us. And I do wonder sometimes what is the correlation because of the stigma, because of the shame, because of this sense that it is this chore that women or, any of us have to move through, how that affects the way we are in the experience of it. And, again, I know that for myself, one of the best ways to move through, just like you, Kika, is to move into this idea of self-pleasure, to fill our bodies up with all of those great endorphins that happen when your body feels good. And when we are listening to what our body needs, and the self-pleasure for me has looked like a gentle, it doesn't always have to be like a full-blown intrusive kind of space, but just even in just the loving of my body and recognizing that, it can be a slow and gentle space that I indulge in that experience where it doesn't have to be penetrative. And I think that we even when we talk about self-pleasure, that's not even something that we see as access to or medicine. And this again is all about the ways I believe we socialize ourselves around sex and sexuality and our sexual health, the way that we view sex as performative mostly, or that as women who are receivers, that we are in a dutiful experience with sexuality. It's a service we provide to others, but we don't recognize the power that we hold in pleasure. And that's kind of like my thing too. Like that's what I tout, especially for melanated bodies, melanated people who, for us, there's this added layer of like an intergenerational and epigenic trauma that just exists because we were, depending, you have been a commodity. And what has that led to in our historical understanding of ourselves and our bodies and our culture and our traditions? And so this idea of touch and pleasure, I think, is a very powerful tool if we're going to talk about this next space and continue. Please throw out your thoughts, but just this idea of what can we do now? How do we battle or move things forward? I don't want to use those kinds of words because I think we have enough of that. We deserve some soft spaces for where we are moving to. What has everybody got on that? No comments?
I can
Okay,
comment.
Oh no,
go ahead, Rachel.
Go ahead. Mine are like, just like easy to do first steps would be like, I always say, like, have conversations with your friends, with your families, again, where there are safe spaces where you feel you can have these conversations is an important note there. And then from kind of like a policy standpoint, I should add in like, if you don't have a family doctor, like going to like walk-in clinics, or there's a lot of awesome health clinics where you can just walk in and have these conversations with a health professional, also very important. But then from a policy standpoint, because I do believe the only way kind of like they go hand in hand, where again, like I said, our federal government's going to roll out free menstrual products in federally regulated workspaces, like that's going to be a domino effect, right? We hope for other businesses, workplaces, schools that they haven't yet done this to also implement free menstrual product initiatives. But I would say, like, if you're a student or you're somebody working right now, or you're at a school like Eve, like talk to, student union type groups, chat with leaders in your school, chat with a boss. Again, all of it's a safe space where you feel comfortable doing so, because those are really like how these policies can go into action. Or if your city councilor, start that conversation. That is honestly, like, from a municipal standpoint, that is where, for example, a lot of initiatives I've been a part of, that is where the conversation started, was just a city councilor realized, oh crap, this is an important issue. We need to address this. And then, everybody jumps on board and you're able to pass it. So in terms of just getting involved in the space, there's so many ways, but then also just joining something on Instagram, right? Like an organization you love on Instagram that's putting out really awesome content you identify with. Cool. Or start your own. That's kind of like my high level suggestions on, because we need more voices. We need more diverse voices in this space. Young people are coming in, which is unreal, but we need more. So there's lots of opportunity to get involved.
I really love that. And I think even just, we only have like a few minutes, so it'll be really quick, really fast. But even like just from a community mindset, like even certain things that you can do, like I know we do enough, but I do think there's some times where you can call people in when they say problematic things. You would be in a space sharing your experience, like, oh, I've had a really rough day, I've been cramping, I've been crying, and someone would be like, oh man, thank goodness I don't experience that, can't relate. It's like, wow, not very supportive. Maybe just be like, oh, that's too bad. Like, is there anything I can do for you? Like, kind of have that collective community care is something that's super important. And I think we can all definitely enact that in our lives. Or when people spread misinformation about abortion, spread misinformation about period and menstrual cycle, if you're someone in that space that has the knowledge, at least maybe tell them, that this is not accurate. Like, this is not, the information that you're sharing is not true, it's not accurate, and here are some resources to look over. I do think that despite the minimal resources that exist in terms of research, there is information out there that we can provide to others to make sure that they're informed. I don't know if anyone's seen this Instagram channel or page, I forgot the name, but it was in light of Roe versus Wade, and someone was out on the street speaking to male individuals who were male presenting individuals, and they asked a really funny question, like, can you pee with a tampon in? And all of them were like, no, it's not recommended. And I was just like, oh my word, like, there's
Crap,
no.
I'm looking it up. If I can get it, I'll post it in the. It was so bad, but so great.
I was like, hold on, like, there's no way, like that. This can't be the state of our world. So I think, if you have the knowledge, like, just educate people if you can. I know it's laborious, I understand. If you have the space to do so, do it. If you don't, that's fine. Take some time to rest. But I'm gonna keep it real. It's bad.
I was gonna say, it seems like it's hard out there, man.
Yeah.
That's a little rough.
Mm.
It's one of those things where we either we laugh or we cry. And I realize Rachel is going to have to leave us. I just want to check in with everybody else. Is it okay if we take a few more minutes? And Rachel, if you do have to jump off, please tell us where we can find you. Thank you so much for being here. Let me know. Let us know where they can find you.
I've got like 2 minutes and I'll make it. I won't be on time, although it's like a blizzard outside. So I might get out there and realize I'm not going, but I'll attempt. No, I got like 2 minutes. And so I'll just jump out quietly in the background.
Okay. Do you want us to let us know where they can find you or anything that you would like to say?
Sure. Someone just noted in the chat, it was Roe versus Bros. Yeah, the Instagram Eve was talking about. It's so funny, like terrifyingly funny. Definitely check it out. And then my social enterprise, the hashtags oh my God, what am I saying? The handle is at Shop Here for Her. So you can check that out. We do a lot of stuff on menstrual equity in Canada.
Thank you so much. Everybody say a shout out. Thank you for offering your wisdom and your vision. Drive safely, please. And we will definitely check back in. And I know I'm following you, so we'll be moving forward. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Is everybody okay with staying on for a few more questions and a few more moments as we move forward? Wonderful. Okay. A lot of this conversation, I know for me, brought up several other things, like what do we even mean by menstrual products? I know that over time, I have moved from using like tampons or using pads, and I'm really in spaces where I'm looking for more environmentally friendly type products. So for me right now, I am down with the Diva Cup, and have been now for at least 8 or 9 years. And it has become like a godsend to me. And I'm not sure how many people know about these other products and let alone having access to them. What do you use? What are you recommending? What are your thoughts on those?
I've kept it pretty simple. I usually just use like maxi pads, but I really want to try the underwear. But every time I found like those kinds of brands, they never had ones for like really heavy flows. So I'm like, okay, maybe one day, there'll be material that can withstand what comes out. But until then, I always recommend night pads all the time. I'm like, wear those long, like from your belly button to your backside. Like those pads have been all reliable for me. But yeah, I definitely want to get on board with the Diva Cup. I definitely want to try it, but I don't know. I'm getting over this fear. I just have this irrational fear of trying those products. So I will get over it eventually. But yeah, all reliable are my pads. Like those have been with me from time.
Kika, what do you subscribe to?
So for me, I also really love pads, and I try to buy the organic cotton ones, and they aren't that, nowadays they aren't much more expensive than the regular ones, especially the, you know, the branded fancy ones with all the blue stripes and individual packaging. So I just go for like super basic organic pads. And I've tried a few menstrual cups actually, but what I found is that it takes a minute to find your size. And this what is it, like not just the size, but also the thickness of it and the material it's made of and how hard it is and kind of the curves of it. It may or may not fit your body. And I find that's a little bit of a bummer, because once you invest in it, you really want it to work. And then for me, I think I've had 2 or 3 that just did not work at all for my body. So I would recommend like picking one that's kind of smaller and softer to begin with. And also, I don't know, for my body, I just don't enjoy having something inside there while I'm bleeding. So I just really like pads. And I've also tried reusable pads, which I think can be a really great option if you have that luxury of washing them at home. And, you know, you're not like grossed out by washing them and other people in your house are fine with it. But there was just something really nice about having cloth pads that felt so good to my skin. And I just ordered them off of Etsy. And it just felt really good. I was surprised. I thought they would be like really bulky and uncomfortable, but I just wanted to try it for the environment. But surprisingly, my body really loved them. And there was something really nice about just using something completely natural and that I can reuse and I can wash myself. And then this is next level for some people, I know. And again, you need to have that luxury of privacy and be a little bit woo-woo or crazy, but you can use that menstrual blood from the cup or menstrual water from like soaking your pads to water your plants or do rituals in your garden. And so that is just the next level relationship that you can develop with your body and your cycle, essentially. Yeah, so that's what I have to say about that.
Love it. Celebrating, because that actually is a thing. You know, I know of a whole movement of people that I know who are practicing and moving towards free bleeding, which is just simply learning muscle control to some degree. And you're able to contain and then let loose at a certain time. And or using, for example, the Diva cups and really getting acquainted with the sense of that this process of our bleeding, of menstruation, is a natural being, and trying to take some of that stigma that is around this supposedly icky space, but mentioning and knowing that it has all of these different dimensions and that you can be using that to give back into the earth. And that was very much what I was touching upon in the land acknowledgement in the beginning of this, that our relationship with with blood and with how that this is a function of one of the amazing things that the human body can do, and why we have stigmatized it is really tied in, I think, with some of the ways that, you know, blood has shown up, for example, in, you know, bloodshed around, you know, taking of this land. Like that's some of the things that I think innately have correlated in with that space as we move forward. And for me, I just know that as we move through this and we talk about like what the journey of our periods are, and as we're wrapping up, I just kind of want to open the floor to either one of you to talk about that. Like, what are the repercussions of our periods? Like, what happens when we don't have the voice, or, you know, our periods don't show up and we are expecting them to? What are those implications that are tied into that?
Yeah, I can talk about that. It's just already that moment when I think it's so relatable when you're waiting for your period and it's not there. And how like that's just the most terrifying moment, and you're just like starting to freak out a little bit, but then you have that conversation with yourself and no, like we should be fine, like I think it's good. And then you start texting your friends and looking for that reassurance that you're gonna be good. Yeah, so what I have to say about it, it's like I already mentioned, like that feeling that if periods are just our responsibility and, you know, men or our partners, our fathers, our brothers don't want to even hear about it, then that creates this disconnection from sharing that responsibility for birth control and for falling pregnant and all of that. And for me, what I did have one abortion. So I'm just going to talk about abortions now. If this is a sensitive topic to somebody, you can just like mute me and come back in a little while. And so what happened for me at the very beginning of my relationship, I went on birth control just because I knew I didn't want to get pregnant. And I was like, I have to just figure this out. So without knowing anything about it, I was kind of, I guess that's what people do. So I got it. And then, you know, like I was on it for 1 year. And during that 1 year, I tried 3 different brands, all of which made me really sick. So it went from like no sex drive to sore boobs to chronic yeast infections that were so painful, I would just cry in my bed. And so after that year, so that was like when I was 19, I was like, okay, no more. I can't do that. So, with my partner, like we've been together for many years now, so it's still the same person. And it felt safe enough for me to really get to know my cycle and my body to not be on birth control. And I just want to say that this is like a huge privilege if you are able to do that, to really follow your cycle and, you know, use condoms or not have sex or have forms of sex that don't include penetration and cum and penises, like whatever, right? We can do all the things. So yeah, for me then to get pregnant by accident, just, you know, like 21, not really knowing my body and being just stupid about it, was so much shame. And not even because I was conditioned that like abortions are evil, but it was that shame and guilt of like, oh my God, what have I just done to my body? Like so much stress and needing to go through all of these procedures, but also just like the, you know, emotional pain, and which it doesn't have to be like that, but it was for me at least, feeling like I just really failed myself. And that feeling was so hard to deal with because nobody taught me otherwise. Like I didn't have the proper information to really take care of myself. And luckily, by that time, I lived in Finland, where abortions are accessible and they are legal. And all you need to do is call your health center and they will book you in for an appointment, and it will cost you like $30. So that's crazy. It was easier for me to get an abortion than to get a phone agreement, so that like, because I needed either 300 euros or a Finnish resident to like sign on my phone agreement, whereas I could get an abortion super easily and just cost me $30. And so even though I had a very privileged experience, and by the way, abortions are not, they're almost illegal where I'm from. And so they're pretty much by now they made them illegal and people just order pills off of the internet. And so there is that. And so for me, it's like we can't talk about menstrual equity and and not touch on contraception and abortions and relationships and how that affects like our whole life essentially, and how knowing your cycle and knowing what's fine and what isn't, knowing what are the warning signs, but also knowing what are the very healthy signs of this is what your fertile window is, and this is what a healthy blood flow is like all of this, it's just basic knowledge. And how do we not have that still? That's kind of crazy to me. So that's also what I'm doing in my work with my clients and students right now, holding that space for people who have had abortions and who feel any kind of disempowerment or shame or grief around it in their bodies. And I really take them through this process. And I can tell you without fail that all the people who like find me just hold these very conflicting feelings about abortions and about choosing themselves and standing up for their bodies. And what we do is like peel off those layers to where they are able to own their story and say it out loud to another person and be held in a space that doesn't have any judgment. And they come out on the other side feeling that much more powerful and kind of clear in their body and in their system to continue making those empowered choices for themselves. And that includes learning about their cycle and menstruation and all of that. So this is like, there's so much potential for connecting with your personal power when it comes to the menstrual cycle as well.
I cannot even, like, I just want to, like, again, this is a breathe in moment, I think. And I really just want to honor you, honor your share, because it's brave, right? That it is such a brave, dead on, head on, facing something that I think is at a very core and visceral space for many of us women. And so I'm gonna leave it open, because I really just think that we have to just honor that you could be so open and real. And I just want to stand with you in deep solidarity, because again, we're seeing a wave that seems to be moving worldwide around this idea of women, or not being able to control our fertility. And it is a fundamental and core like right to being. When you can control your fertility, you control the world. And we are actually seeing that. And so I just want to recognize and maybe call out or call in these ties to the space. Because, I know in my world, I've had, 4 children, and out of the 4, maybe one of them was planned. And I'm kind of like, around that. The other 3 were definitely loving and wonderful surprises. But I've also had miscarriages, and I've been through other experiences around this space too. And so again, it's how do we move through all of these experiences that are tied in so infinitely, intricately with this idea of fertility and our womanly spaces, and who controls the choices that we get to make around that. And I really also want to mention the fact that you are offering a no judgment space for somebody or anybody to be able to express. That is so big. That is so big. Eve, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just have to say, the work that both of you do is extremely inspiring, because I'm going to be honest. I go through bouts of frustration more frequently now because I'll be honest, periods, yeah, periods are painful. It's just a natural process. But I think something that just makes it's just annoying that we deal with these natural processes in life, and life is only more difficult because of society, because of the patriarchy. That's why we struggle as well. There's just so many, like, where do we even begin? Like, dealing with cramps, dealing with, even the mental health, the emotions. For me, the week before PMS, I'm crying, I'm irritable, I'm angry, I'm all sorts of things. If you go push me enough, I might even do something illegal. Like, it's just like some, it's these emotions. I'm like, what is happening? And I'm just having to function normally. Like, oh, well, everyone experiences it. So you just kind of have to deal with it. And it's like, no, like, where's the community care? Where's the support? Where is, the resource for us to be a community and heal during this period of time? Why do I have to even work during this period of time where my brain is like jumping from one emotion to another? And, it's really like, yeah, periods are hard, but it's patriarchy, it's society that makes it harder to manage and deal with. And it makes it extremely frustrating to try to navigate this. And then when it comes to choice, feminism it's always been about choice and the freedom for us to make our decisions, to do what's best for us. And I'm a fierce advocate for abortion, a fierce advocate for birth control. Like, I'm a fierce advocate for doing whatever works for you. And then once again, patriarchy, society, capitalism, all these external components, they step in and say, actually, no, you should not get an abortion because of XYZ, morality, religion, who knows? Or you cannot get these birth control pills because they're extremely expensive. And you have to go to the pharmacist to get Plan B instead of getting it off a shelf. So now, on top of the stigma of being sexually liberated and being sex positive, you have to deal with people that can potentially judge you for taking charge of your own health. So it's really frustrating to live in a world like this. And I think it's so important to have these talks and have these spaces, because personally for me, I'm not really, I'm an educator, yes, but I'm not polite anymore. I'm not going to be polite, I'm just going to tell it like it is. We're suffering every day, and I'm sick of being quiet about it, being polite about it. This is real, this is reality, and I don't want to tiptoe around the problem anymore. This is what people are dealing with every day. Like, I know they paint Canada and the US as progressive places, but even in Niagara Falls, it's difficult to get an abortion. You have to go out to Hamilton. Like, it's not even accessible in our metropolitan region. So how progressive and advanced are we? And we talk about it all the time, and then there's someone countering it, and it's just really frustrating. Like, yes, these are natural processes, but it's really the people or the society that makes it even unnecessarily harder for us. These shouldn't be taboos. We shouldn't be ashamed, but we are, because of what the society that we live in. So, I mean, it's never, I hope it goes away. One can hope, but I just firmly believe that we wouldn't be dealing with half of these issues if it wasn't for the patriarchy. Yeah.
I'm hearing you, Eve, and I just like want to really, again, celebrate that we were talking earlier about there is revolution happening here. And so I want to bring us back around to a place of power, that even if we are having some challenges, there is this movement, and I think that we are showing up stronger. And just quickly, because we are going to be moving to our final closing spaces, I noticed that there's a question that just came up in the chat here, so we're going to speak to it in just 2 minutes. But I've noticed that there is a movement happening with women. I was just reading this article in Japan and China, where they are consciously choosing for their ability to say no to pregnancy based upon, going against completely their societal norms. And for some of those places, almost based upon extinction. But because of what the challenges have been and what it has meant for women, they are standing strong. And I, just want us to celebrate and recognize that it is coming as we're moving forward. So this is a great time. We are going to continue this fight. And power up, everybody. Let's do the whole thing. The question was, how can we promote menstrual equity community care in the workplace? And this was a question. I would love to hear it. And I'm also going to add one more thing that I thought was really cool. In Spain, they recently just added legislation where they are actually offering menstrual days, like they're offering menstrual sick days for those who need to use them. And that to me is progress. So that's a good way. What are your thoughts? I know that Rachel also mentioned hitting, your local governments, your municipal government spaces. Start small so we can move it out. But any other thoughts coming in?
Yeah, I can comment on that. And I think it just, I think there are things that, from different perspectives, right? So thinking of just myself, back when I was working for different companies, and I would just, as an employee, I would just start these conversations myself. So for example, I would buy those period pads or tampons and put them in the bathroom, like just once, and then somebody noticed and it was like, oh, is it yours? Can I use this? And then the management would comment, like, for example, when I worked in restaurants and so on, it was like, oh, okay, so do you want us to be buying this? Should we like add this to the orders that are coming in? And I was like, okay, well, that would be nice. Or if you don't know how to do that, if they were men, I was like, I can also just go to the store and buy them and just, you give me the money back, I'll bring you the receipt. Mm-hmm. And that was usually fine with people. So that's just one very small way of having like immediate change in your work environment. Of course, there's more to that. And then if you are an employer, then it's considering what do people need. And I just was reading about it, that it's always good to check with your company and with your actual people, because for some people it's going to be like, yes, maybe they want those menstrual leave days, but they need to be called sick leave days so that they don't out anybody, because there can be so much shame around it. Mm-hmm. So just being in touch within the organization or the company that you're in and kind of doing those small moves and seeing how it goes, mm-hmm. whether you are an employee or employer, I think that's really important. So that's just a quick little something to implement immediately. And I hope that answers the question in part.
Eve, you got any comments? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar to Kika's answer, but for myself, I do manage a small team of staff. So for us, we've been able to build a relationship among each other that if someone simply isn't feeling well, if someone else can take their shifts, like their drop-in shift or workshop shift, all they'd have to do is private message me and I could just say, because sometimes people they're not at that stage where they can explicitly, share it. So they'll be like, oh, they're just not feeling well. I'm going to take this shift, or could you take this shift? Like that kind of thing. I'm pretty lax in the workplace because, I don't want people to work while they're in pain, and I don't want people to feel bad for requesting for a day off and things like that. So at the end of the day, the work is going to be there. Either it's going to be there tomorrow or next week. Just take some time to take care of yourself. That's what I typically say. So in the workplace, you can just simply start from listening to your staff and your employees if you're in a manager or supervisor position. And I also have pads and tampons in my office as well. And I always carry Advil. It's the liquid gels. It's the ibuprofen liquid gels that I don't know what it is. They're just fantastic. So I always have them on me. And yeah, I just make sure that they're safe, you know, like go home, you don't have, the work's going to be here tomorrow. The work's going to be here in a few days. You don't worry about it, you know, like, yeah, it's just, I don't want them to deal with the stress when they're trying to navigate, you know,
those
their
spaces.
cycle. Yeah.
I love it. And we are coming down to the wire, but I'm going to add something really, really quickly. I just was thinking about it. And you mentioned something about, you know, one, being the change you want to be. You can start real small. And I know in my office, I worked in an office for many years and developed out relationships. And one of the things that we used to do is everybody would have like a hot water bottle. We would keep hot water bottles in our desks, and you know, we're making eye contact, and if somebody's having it rough, we would know, and they would get passed around. And so again, it truly is and always has been a space for community, for us to maybe take a moment to break down that shame, to recognize that this is a powerful, natural part of our being. And if we claim it as such, it will be as such. And I am just so grateful as we wrap this up. We've got a minute left. One word, if we could say anything, just one word each, just to sum up your thoughts or where we are, and then we will say goodnight.
I really love the point you made about community, and I find that you can always find at least one person, regardless of where you are, who will understand it or will be willing to understand. And if they are a sexist boss at the workplace, then, you know, sometimes you just have to play the game and be the little victim who just needs to rest and needs to be taken care of. And so when you're in a pinch, that also works. So that's
any means possible.
Any means possible. Yeah. Thank you.
Eve, final thoughts.
I am extremely happy to have been a part of this panel, and I'm just always so grateful that we have people doing the work that you're doing, and we have people just making a change in their communities and changing people's lives. And if you didn't hear it today, just know that you're making an extremely massive difference for everyone. So I know this work can get tiring, mentally draining, but it is just amazing to be in these spaces and just share this discussion and feel comfortable enough to talk about these subjects. And I feel empowered today, and I feel grateful as well. So yeah, I'm just glad that we have people that are leading the charge and just work every day. So yes, those are my final thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I love it. I am excited. Right. Thank you, everybody who attended. Know that this is only a beginning of a conversation. We can all be reached. Our stuff will be in the chat. Please reach out. Put a comment down if you'd like in any of our handles on Instagram, anywhere that you can reach us, and let us know, how did this show up for you? And again, know that you are the change that you want to be, and we can start small, but every small gesture becomes a big revolution. Thank you and good night, or good afternoon or evening, whenever you're watching this later on. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. I'm checking to see if we're off. I think so. Still recording?